If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also be sure to hit that like button to support the channel. Let's begin. Okay, so continuing with my assessment / breakdown of Sins of the Future for Power Rangers, this couldn't come at a more fitting time, because I just got off the high of meeting Wes Collins, the man himself, Jason Font, and he personalized and signed my copy of the book, and I got the chance to ask him lots of questions about his and JDF's movie, The Legend of the White Dragon. Single coolest moment of my life, and one of the coolest people you can ever meet. He is the man. Anyway, so we're picking up from where we left off after part 1. Now, when we ended part 1, we left things off with Jen Scott's being told by Captain Logan that they must wipe Wes's memory of ever being with her. This fades back to the year of 06. A bit of a correction on my part from last time where I said the past was centered around the year of 2000. It's 06, just for some clarification. And in the year of 2006, Wes is standing near his car waiting for Jen to arrive again, and luckily he's there on time this time. For sure, making up for the last time he was late. And he's waiting there with pink and red roses, and his and Jen's reunion is so sweet and so romantic. But you also get this sense that things aren't going to be as happy as they were from last time. Last time their date ended on a relatively nice, happy note, right? But this time, you know things are going to be different, and you know things are going to just take a turn from the inner monologue that Jen has here, where she explains how she's going to have to tell Wes that they can no longer be together, that he cannot have any knowledge of the future. Except Wes here, he doesn't allow her to even mention it, because Wes talks about how he's got a surprise for her, and he stops in front of Silver Hills' clock tower, and the clock tower was owned by Wes's dad, and Wes loaned it to the Time Force team as a base of operations. It was their home away from home during his tenure as the Red Ranger. But at the end of Time Force, the clock tower was destroyed by their enemies. And what this does is it sets the stage that things aren't quite right. Because for the clock tower to suddenly just be rebuilt like this means there's a rather big inconsistency. But Wes is so overwhelmingly happy to surprise Jen that he doesn't even care. Again, this shows Wes's naivety and recklessness, and this is important for you all to keep in the back of your minds for later. And as they climb up the clock tower, it's revealed that Wes had set up a romantic candlelit dinner for Jen, complete with champagne and Time Force Ranger themed red and pink cupcakes that he baked himself, and flowers. And again, this shows just how deeply Wes has grown to love Jen. But he's also pretty much at the honeymoon phase in his relationship with her, right? The honeymoon phase is truly the point before you hit that roadblock and you realize that your relationship is just going to get more complicated. And how you deal with those complications beyond a certain point, that's the tough part. You either work through those complications together as best you can and sort of come to a middle ground, or one feels that they're putting in all the effort while the other half of them isn't bothering, and it's putting the brakes on their feelings. Having dated myself at one point, I know what that feels like to slowly fall out of the honeymoon phase, and it's not easy to deal with, believe me, but there's only so much crap anyone, especially a woman, can go through and take. But I do not by any means envy Jen or even Wes here at all, because what comes next sucks big time for them. The honeymoon phase quickly comes to a close, where Jen begins realizing, okay, something isn't adding up here, and then she suddenly yells out, "Wes, look out!" And the clock tower explodes, sending them crumbling down onto the ground, with Wes obviously suffering the worst injuries of the two of them. And before the two can even process what happened, they see another Time Force Ranger, a black Time Force Ranger at that. Now, remember back when we covered part 1, where there was that diagram Captain Logan was pointing to, talking to Jen about the Hyperforce training? Well, there was the color black in that palette, which, from what I can configure, is connected to this somehow. I think that was some foreshadowing on the writer's part, but we'll worry about that later. Anyway, this Black Ranger basically tells Jen that she is a traitor and that she destroyed the timeline and that she needs to pay for these supposed crimes that she committed. And before Wes and Jen can even fully morph, the Black Time Force Ranger lashes out and firmly believes that they've been eliminated. And Jen's monologue continues, explaining that she has to go back to the year of 3006 somehow, but the first thing she needs to do is she needs to worry about Wes, because he's clearly badly hurt, and she calls for Eric to come and pick him up and get him to a doctor, explaining that the clock tower has been destroyed again. And clearly Eric is confused by this, because this is the first time he's hearing about the clock tower being rebuilt based off the conversation Jen is having with him off panel. And Jen tells Wes, how could we have let this happen? And Wes is like, but we can fix it. And Jen tells him, no, that was a Black Time Force Ranger. This was my doing. This was my fault. We never should have gotten together. And Wes, he still is trying to convince her otherwise, saying, but we're a team. But Jen comes to this realization that this is a battle Wes cannot help her with, that she must do it on her own, and that means breaking up with him for not only his own good, but for the good of the future. And this is where Jen realizes she needs to cut herself off from her emotions. The mission needs to come first, and this truly does bring her back to that place that she was in mentally when Alex Drake got murdered right in front of her eyes. At that time, she couldn't afford to grieve and be emotional over Alex's death, and this is basically the same thing, albeit in a different capacity. She cannot afford to be upset over breaking things off with Wes because the mission comes first. And sure, this might make Jen seem very cold and a bit heartless, but she is the Time Force leader, first and foremost, and she will always go back to that mentality of needing to be the alpha of her pack. And if that means cutting herself off from her emotions, she'll do it. She's tough as nails, so independent. She endures and fights until the battle is over, and that's quite frankly why so many fans love her, because they're amazed at how strong and resilient she's able to be, even under the worst circumstances. She's a symbolism of how strong women can be, and this whole panel and the moments that come afterwards display that perfectly. And as Jen leaves, trying to remain as strong as possible, you see Wes is absolutely crushed, and that's how Eric ends up finding him. And man, Wes's reaction to Jen dumping him is just so raw. It goes to show how deep and hard he fell for Jen, and just how just the thought of her leaving him like this, it kills him. And it really does take you back to that final moment of them together in the Time Force finale, where they were holding each other, confessing their love. I mean, you can't help but feel for the guy, because Jen was the girl who truly changed him. She made him mature and develop a sense of discipline that Wes's own father couldn't. And just the pain on Wes's face here, man, it was drawn so well in these panels. But even so, Jen admits to herself in the next few panels that she cannot think straight, and granted, she's trying her hardest to hold it together, considering she just dumped her boyfriend, and she's trying to make her way back to her timeline. The future is in jeopardy, and she missed her opportunity to go back, and when she finally makes it back, she lands outside Katie's apartment, and this is where the wheels begin falling off here, because she goes off searching for her Yellow Ranger at her home, and she's immediately attacked from behind here by Katie, Circuit, Trip, and Lucas, who brand her a fugitive, and Jen cannot seem to even reason with them at all, because in this new timeline that she and Wes created together, basically, her teammates do not see her as their leader, but rather as a traitor, and Jen could easily surrender, right? But she doesn't. She fights back. She kicks butt, like she always does. And it is during this battle that she ends up meeting a reformed Nadira. Now, Nadira was one of Rancic's followers, specifically his daughter, and after Rancic willingly turned himself into the Time Force team and accepted his punishment, Nadira got set up by Lucas so she could get a lesser punishment and not have to go to prison. Keep that in the back of your minds. Now, Nadira takes Jen with her to her lab, and it is here that we get a bit of a breakdown of what's going on. Nadira explains to Jen that she is from a farther away future, and then this cuts back to Wes and Eric in the past, with Eric trying to help Wes through his breakup, and Wes, as you can pretty much figure, he is a mess. And Eric tries telling him, come on, man, you can't keep wallowing like this. You'll heal. You just need time. And this pretty much establishes to the readers that Eric is a lot more hardened than Wes, right? Even if you never saw the show, you're able to gather that Eric is the more resilient of the two, whereas Wes is prone to falling apart. Because Wes, before his time with Time Force, never really had to worry too much about being in a position where he could be emotionally tested. He had every ounce of financial security due to the lifestyle his father could provide for him, whereas Eric grew up needing to essentially have that every man for himself mentality, where nothing is stable and nobody is there for you. You need to handle it all yourself. And again, this panel shows just how different they truly are, yet there's also this strong camaraderie between these two. But before Eric can offer his comrade, his surrogate brother in every single sense of the word, any more sympathy, they get called to the Silver Guardian's base, and it is there that the men learn from their commanding officer that between the clock tower suddenly reappearing and the Cyclobots being more determined than ever to attack the city, that this means there's an anomaly with the timeline, and this leads to the Black Time Force Ranger attacking the Silver Guardian's HQ. Now, cut back to Jen and Nadira. Nadira's explanation continues here. She says the timeline, the past, has been altered, which changed their present. And we see panels of the past where Wes is getting attacked by this mysterious Black Ranger. And it is here that Nadira pulls up an email from Wes to Jen, and it basically explains the Black Ranger's attack had already happened. And Wes explains that this Black Ranger is female, and that given the chance, she will kill Jen, and that he and Eric don't have much time left, and that he loved Jen. Notice how he doesn't say, I love you, but rather, I loved you. Meaning, at this point, Wes and Eric have died. They haven't survived, and that email was his final act of communication with Jen. And it is then that Jen comes to the conclusion of, we must break into the Time Force base. We have to gather as much intel as possible. Because if she's going to change the past one more time to save Wes and prevent this future from happening, she'll need to take some major risks. And here, we get some inner thoughts from Jen, who tells us that she misses having a team. She misses at least having Wes and Eric as company, and that working with Nadira is weird, but at the very least, she's grateful for a friend. And this is pivotal, because this whole time, Jen has been going back to being her usual hard-ass self, giving us a little bit of insight to what she's thinking and feeling. We see her vulnerability, and a side of her we, as the audience, rarely get to see. But by spending this kind of time with her, we realize Jen cannot do everything on her own. She needs a support system. Even if it's an old enemy, she'll take it whichever way it comes. And then this is when we get a panel featuring the death of Alex. And this is from the Black Time Force Ranger's perspective. Now, this is important because up until this point, we've only been getting Jen and Wes's points of view. Having the point of view from someone else gives us some insights into exactly what's going on. And by seeing these panels showcasing Alex's death from the pilot episode, we know that Alex's death is connected to this new Ranger. And this new Ranger essentially blames Jen for the death of Alex. But why? How did Jen kill Alex? She loved Alex. She would never do anything to bring harm to him, at least not intentionally. It was all Rancic, right? Or at least so we thought. Now, I think that's a good place to cap things off, and I think I'll wrap things up when I make a part 3 of this story breakdown. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Also be sure to check out my social media links as well. God bless, happy viewing, and have a nice night.